Hashtag James Dean stopped to help a stranded family on Route 99. They didn't recognize him until later. Hashtag Section 1. The cold open, September 28, 1955. California Route 99. 2 days before destiny would claim him forever. A 1949 Ford station wagon sits dead on the shoulder. Engine smoking. 3 children crying in the back seat. Their father stands helpless, staring at a blown radiator hose he cannot fix. No money, no tools, no hope. Then, a silver Porsche Spyder pulls over. The driver steps out, young, intense eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He doesn't introduce himself. He just starts working, grease under his fingernails, sweat on his brow. The father has no idea he's watching a legend burn his last hours of kindness into the asphalt of history. Here is the story. Hashtag Section 2. Setting the scene late September in California's Central Valley. The kind of heat that makes the horizon shimmer like a mirage. Route 99 stretches, north to south. A ribbon of black tar connecting farmland to the coast, ambition to oblivion. This wasn't the glamorous California of postcards. This was the working California, the forgotten California. The Jensen family had been traveling since Don Robert Jensen, 32 years old, a fruit picker from Bakersfield, was moving his family north toward Modesto. There was rumor of work in the orchards, rumor of a better life. His wife, Margaret, sat in the passenger seat, 7 months pregnant, fanning herself with a folded newspaper. In the back, 3 children, ages 4, 6, and 8, were restless, hungry, and scared. When the radiator hose burst just past Bakersfield, Robert knew they were in trouble. This wasn't a flat tire. This wasn't something you could pray away. The car was dead. And out here on this empty stretch of highway, you could die waiting for help that never came. Meanwhile, 70 miles north, James Dean was supposed to be in Los Angeles. He was supposed to be at a studio meeting. He was supposed to be playing the game, shaking hands, smiling for the cameras, being the product Hollywood had manufactured. But James Dean had never been good at being a product. At 24 years old, he had already filmed 3 movies that would define a generation east of Eden. Rebel Without a Cause. Giant. The first had been released, the second was about to be, the third was still in post-production. He was on the verge of something colossal, superstardom, immortality, but he was suffocating. Fame felt like a noose. Every interview, every photo shoot, every forced smile, it was killing something inside him. So he drove. That's what he did when the walls closed in. He got in his Porsche 550 Spyder, the one he'd nicknamed Little Bastard, and he drove fast. Speed was the only honest thing left in his life. That morning he'd blown off the meeting. He told his mechanic, Rolf Wutherich, to pack light. They were heading to Salinas for a weekend race. No studio handlers, no press, just the road, the machine, and the wind. He was dressed like a farmhand. Blue jeans, a white t-shirt, red windbreaker, the wire-rimmed glasses he hated wearing but needed for distance. He looked like a college kid, like nobody. And that's exactly what he wanted. Hashtag Section 3, the build-up and the struggle. The Jensen family had been stranded for 40 minutes when the silver Porsche appeared on the horizon. At first it was just a glint of metal, a shimmer. Then the sound, that unmistakable growl of a high-performance engine. It screamed past them, doing at least 90 miles per hour, and for a moment Margaret Jensen felt her heart sink. Just another rich kid in a fast car, no soul, no compassion. But then the brake lights flared, the Porsche slowed, pulled over about 50 yards ahead, sat there idling for a moment as if the driver was deciding whether or not to get involved. Robert Jensen wiped his hands on his pants, suddenly self-conscious. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. His shirt was stained with sweat and dust. He looked like what he was, a broke man with a broken-down car and a family depending on him. The driver's door opened. The young man who stepped out moved with a kind of loose, natural grace, like a cat, like someone who lived in his body instead of just occupying it. He walked toward them, squinting in the sun, and Robert noticed the glasses first, then the jaw. Sharp, defined. There was something magnetic about him, even dressed down like he was. "Need some help?" the young man asked. His voice was soft, almost shy. "Radiator hose blue," Robert said, pointing at the smoking engine. "I don't suppose you've got a spare?" The young man smiled. Not a Hollywood smile. A real one. No spare. "But maybe we can rig something." He walked to the front of the station wagon and leaned over the engine. Didn't ask permission. Didn't hesitate. Just started examining the problem like he'd done it 1,000 times before. His passenger, a German man with a thick accent, stayed in the Porsche, looking impatient. "You know cars?" Robert asked, surprised. "I know enough," the young man said. He touched the blown hose, felt the heat still radiating from the engine block. "You've been sitting here a while. Engine's still too hot to work on safely." Margaret Jensen had gotten out of the car now, holding her belly, watching this stranger work. The children pressed their faces against the back window, silent for the first time all day. "We've got no money for a tow," Margaret said quietly. "We were trying to make it to Modesto." The young man looked up at her, those eyes, intense, old beyond their years. "You don't need money," he said. "You just need time." He walked back to the Porsche and returned with a jug of water, a rag, and a roll of electrical tape. For the next 20 minutes he worked in silence. He let the engine cool. He fashioned a temporary patch using the tape and a section of rubber from his own car's emergency kit. His hands moved with precision, confidence. This wasn't charity, this was craftsmanship. Quick question. Have you ever met someone who changed your life in 15 minutes and you didn't even know their name? Let us know in the comments. Robert tried to make conversation, asked where the young man was headed, asked what he did for a living. The answers were vague, evasive, just heading north, just trying to clear my head. There was something haunted about him. Margaret noticed it too, a sadness behind the helpfulness, like he was running from something he couldn't outrun. When the temporary fix was complete, the young man stepped back, wiping his hands on the rag. "That should get you to the next town. Maybe 20-30 miles. Find a real mechanic and get it done right." Robert reached for his wallet even though he knew it was empty. "I wish I could—" "Don't," the young man said, cutting him off. "Just get your family somewhere safe." He started walking back to the Porsche. The German passenger was gesturing at his watch, clearly annoyed. They were late for something. "Wait," Margaret called out. "At least tell us your name." The young man paused, turned. For a moment it looked like he might. Then he just smiled that sad, beautiful smile and said, "Doesn't matter. Drive safe." He got in the Porsche. The engine roared to life, and just like that, he was gone. A silver bullet disappearing into the heat shimmer of Route 99. The Jensen children waved at the vanishing car. Robert started the station wagon. The engine coughed, sputtered, then caught. Margaret said a silent prayer. They made it to Modesto by nightfall. #Section 4, the climax. The event 2 days later, the world stopped. September 30th, 1955. 5:45 p.m. Junction of Highway 46 and Highway 41 near Colame, California. James Dean's Porsche 550 Spyder collided with a 1950 Ford Tudor. The impact was catastrophic. The Porsche was nearly cut in half. Dean was pronounced dead on arrival at Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital. He was 24 years old. The news hit like an atomic bomb. Radio broadcasts interrupted programming. Newspapers printed special editions. Teenagers across America wept in the streets. The studios scrambled. Warner Bros. Had to decide whether to still release Rebel Without a Cause. They did, and it made James Dean a martyr, an icon, a forever young god frozen in celluloid. But in a small apartment in Modesto, Margaret Jensen was ironing her husband's work shirt when the news came over the radio. Actor James Dean was killed today in a car accident in Central California. She stopped. The iron hissed against the fabric. The star of Feast of Eden was driving his Porsche Spyder north on Route 466 when Robert walked in from the bedroom. "What's wrong?" Margaret couldn't speak. She walked to the kitchen drawer where she kept important papers, birth certificates, the lease, and underneath it all a newspaper she'd bought 3 days ago. She unfolded it, turned to the entertainment section. There he was, James Dean, promoting Rebel without a cause. That same face, those same wire-rimmed glasses, that same haunted look. "Oh my God," she whispered, "that was him." Robert took the newspaper, stared at the photograph. The realization crashed over him like a cold wave. The young man who'd stopped to help them, the young man who'd gotten his hands dirty fixing their car, the young man who'd refused payment and driven away without giving his name. That was James Dean, and he was dead. Margaret sat down at the kitchen table and began to cry, not the theatrical crying of grief, but the quiet, devastating crying of missed connection, of gratitude that would never be expressed, of a gift that could never be repaid. "He helped us," she said, her voice breaking. "He was 2 days from dying and he stopped to help us." Robert stood there holding the newspaper, trying to process it. Here was a movie star, a kid from Indiana who'd become the voice of a generation. He could have driven past, should have driven past them. He was late, he was in a hurry, he had places to be. But he stopped. He got out of his $7,000 racing car, knelt in the dirt beside a $200 station wagon, and fixed a radiator hose for a family he'd never see again. The next day, Margaret Jensen did something that would remain private for nearly 60 years. She wrote a letter. She addressed it to the family of James Dean in care of Warner Bros. Studios. In it, she detailed everything: the date, the location, the act of kindness. She described how gentle he'd been with her children, how he'd worked in silence, never once making them feel small or less than, how he'd refused money, how he'd told them to drive safe. She ended the letter with a single line: "The world thinks they lost a great actor. We lost a great man." She mailed it on October 3, 1955. The letter was never acknowledged, never responded to. For decades, Margaret assumed it had been lost in the tsunami of fan mail and condolences that flooded the studio after Dean's death. Over 3,000 letters a week were arriving: grieving teenagers, devastated fans, industry people offering hollow tributes. One letter from a fruit picker's wife in Modesto didn't stand a chance, but it wasn't lost. Section 5. The Aftermath and the Reveal. In 2014, a researcher named David Lower was combing through the Warner Bros. Archives for a book on James Dean. He was looking for contracts, call sheets, correspondence, the usual primary source material. What he found was a box marked MISC, Fan Mail 1955. Inside were hundreds of letters. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect: hysterical declarations of love, poems, drawings, the kind of thing that makes you both sad and uncomfortable. But near the bottom of the box, Lower found an envelope that looked different. It was heavier, the handwriting was adult, measured, and it wasn't addressed to James Dean, it was addressed to his family. Lower opened it as he read Margaret Jensen's letter. He realized he was holding something extraordinary. This wasn't fan worship, this was witness testimony. This was documentation of James Dean's character in the final hours of his life. Lower spent 6 months tracking down the Jensen family. Margaret had passed away in 1998, Robert in 2003, but their daughter, Linda Jensen Morrison, was still alive. She was 63 years old, living in Sacramento, and she had no idea her mother had written the letter. When Laura called her, she didn't believe him at first. "My mother never mentioned James Dean," Linda said. "I mean, we knew about the car breaking down. We knew someone helped us. But she never said it was him." "Why do you think that was?" Laura asked. Linda was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Because she didn't want to make it about her. She didn't want to turn his kindness into a story she told at parties. It was sacred to her, private. That's the detail that haunts me. Margaret Jensen carried that secret for 43 years. She could have sold the story. She could have dined out on it for the rest of her life. The day James Dean saved my family, it would have been currency, attention, validation, but she stayed silent. Because to her, James Dean wasn't a celebrity. He was a kind stranger who'd helped her family when they were vulnerable, and that deserved respect, not exploitation." The letter was eventually donated to the Fairmount Historical Museum in Indiana, Dean's hometown. It sits in a climate-controlled display case now, next to his high school yearbook and a pair of his glasses. Visitors read it and cry, because it confirms what we all wanted to believe about James Dean, that he wasn't just a great actor, he was a great human being. In the final interview James Dean ever gave, recorded just 3 days before his death, he was asked what he wanted his legacy to be. He said, and I quote, "I don't want to be remembered as a movie star. I want to be remembered as someone who gave a damn." On September 28, 1955, on a forgotten stretch of Route 99, he proved it. Section 6, Conclusion and Legacy. Here's the truth about James Dean that Hollywood never wanted you to know. He hated fame. He hated the phoniness, the backslapping, the fake smiles and empty promises. He once said, "Being a good actor isn't easy. Being a man is even harder. I want to be both before I'm done." He never got the chance to be done. 24 years old, 3 films, gone. But in those 24 years, he lived with more integrity than most people manage in 80. He stood up for marginalized actors on set. He mentored young performers who were struggling. He sent money anonymously to families in his hometown who were going through hard times. And yes, he stopped to help a stranded family on Route 99, even though he was late, even though he was tired, even though he had every excuse not to. That's who James Dean was when the cameras weren't rolling. The Jensen family never forgot him. Linda Jensen Morrison said that her mother kept a photograph of James Dean in her Bible until the day she died. Not as a fan, as a reminder that kindness still existed, that goodness was real. What would the world look like if we all lived like that? If we stopped for the stranded families on our own Route 99s, if we helped without expectation of recognition or reward? James Dean didn't stop that day because he knew he was about to die. He stopped because that's who he was. Authentically, completely, a man who gave a damn. 2 days later, he was gone. But the ripples of that moment are still spreading. 70 years later, we're still talking about it, still moved by it, still challenged by it. So here's my question for you. When was the last time you stopped? When was the last time you got your hands dirty for someone who couldn't repay you? Let us know in the comments. Because we need more of that now. We need more people who stop. Rest in peace, James Dean. You were a rebel. You were a legend. You were a movie star. But more importantly, you were a man who gave a damn. And unfortunately, they don't make men like James Dean anymore.